I have 624 individual cards, 74% of all Super Nintendo USA releases.
There's also some obscure peripherals.
11, 12, 13, 14. One of the things I always like to get was ridiculous and crazy controllers. Yeah, this looks like Harvest Moon. 6 Space Invaders games. Super Noah's Ark 3D. These are super collectible nowadays. I think it's like a Game Genie.
JuntSNES, JuntSNES.
JuntSNES. Frankie, today we have a small but interesting part of my collection to look at, test equipment. Super Nintendo test equipment was something that players at home never saw.
You know what this reminds me of? Training videos for Nintendo employees.
Yeah, like maybe at a retail store,
Right.
but you have to watch the training video.
For Nintendo.
For Nintendo.
If you're selling Nintendo.
You need to be trained.
And the kids couldn't have done anything. I mean, they're good kids.
Sometimes they'll put soft drink or something on there.
It was fine. I would just.
And so would these have been used at retail stores?
Yes, you would have had a very basic setup where you really just would have had a Super Nintendo and maybe one of these cartridges. If someone bought in a Super Nintendo that they didn't know if it was working or not, they could set it up on a monitor they had there, test it out, and see if it was working with one of these test cartridges. If you were a bigger video game store, you might have one of these. And this actually connected to an NES test system. You'd stick them together, and then you had a combination NES and Super Nintendo test station, and then you get to the big guys. And there were a few places nationally that could service Super Nintendos on an electronic level. Service manuals that Nintendo would issue, and these are very rare. They have directions on how to fix the Super Nintendo on a technical level. I've actually got 3 test cartridges in my collection. Nintendo issued many test cartridges. There's at least 3 more besides this. I was pretty obsessed with getting the test cartridges because they're rare, they're unusual. This was actually one of the very last things I bought as part of my collection. Let's start off with the oldest test cartridge I have. Got our controller test, can select that one. It instructs you buttons to press, including the diagonals.
I feel like you could actually give this cartridge to a very young child and they might just have fun pressing the buttons.
I think you're right, actually. If this was the only Super Nintendo game I had, I'd make some kind of hay out of it. I think John just likes that obnoxious sound.
I kind of like it too.
So that's one of the tests. You want to try?
I want to try it.
Let me get next level.
I'll wait till Keith's
Keith's
done.
really good at this game.
Nice.
These cartridges are clearly a show for parents and people who are coming in. Because there's no way if you were in the back office you'd need the Super Nintendo logo on top of everything.
Right.
This one's one of my favorites, the Super Nintendo sound module test.
Wait 12 sec.
Yes.
Gins.
It's actually doing both speakers.
Imagine that's the last thing you hear before you enter a different dimension.
Just probably is the sound.
People say this is the last thing they hear before they die. They smell bacon and they hear this.
I've heard this
That'd be a cool
in a
way to
game.
die. It's like a gun blast or something?
Yeah,
This is Zelda 2?
I think so.
For some reason on the SNES?
Dun, dun, dun.
It might have
Yeah.
just been whatever piece of music they had around.
Yeah, this is definitely Zelda 2. So maybe Zelda 2 was like, oh, this is kind of a complex song for the first Nintendo system.
We have a Super Scope test here, which I have never gone into this menu. It has you fire at the bullseye.
You could try the SNES rifle.
You got your mouse test here, electronics test, button test, cursor movement test. All right, let's do the cursor test. Oh, I did the wrong button and it failed. Okay, so I have to press this button 6 times. Good job. Look for smooth mouse movement.
Oh, look at that. The mouse is on a layer higher than the text.
It is.
This one charismatic game.
And then we get the burn-in test. This is designed to test if your Super Nintendo is actually reliable over a long period of time. And it says actually in this manual, once you're done repairing any Super Nintendo, you put this on and you just leave it for 8 hours.
Anthony! Stop testing Super Nintendos! He lets it run all day. This is so weird. Have you ever seen this before?
I have not watched this version.
Maybe they would be playing this on the TV in the retail.
Why is it like kind of 70s psychedelic?
It's testing like all various features. Look at that SMB3 graphic.
Oh, it makes me happy. SMB3.
Testing the Mosaic processor, super high res mode.
High res.
Yeah, it's like 512 by 512.
Yeah, and then of course that Repairman Mario, which
Yeah.
you saw on the back of every manual. This all reminds me more of like PC games. than
Yeah.
Super
Yeah, it
Nintendo.
does.
Under what circumstances would it not be able to play through that whole thing?
If something goes wrong in one of the processors and then it ends up locking up, you would know.
So the idea is that it just runs through most of the things a Super Nintendo could do.
Can do.
What does it mean by burn-in test?
It's an older term that doesn't really apply to Super Nintendo, but it's kind of carried over from when components had to heat up really get the full temperature.
Okay.
And they were kind of burning. So you'd have to make sure that even when they heated up, they were reliable.
So stress testing the hardware.
Yeah, so now I'm gonna plug in one of the other two test cartridges I have, and these are both from later on in the Super Nintendo's life. These are both labeled NTF 2.5 test cartridge. The character test looks a lot like the one that we saw from the burn-in, but some things are different. Notice these are Super Mario World sprites. Some of these Super Mario World sprites are not the final version from the actual Super Nintendo game. They are beta sprites. Like these are beta assets from Super Mario World that don't exist in the final game.
That, I don't like that.
Right channel. Right.
It kind of plays a bizarre version of the SMB1 theme. Here, this one, listen to this one.
This is your left channel. Left.
The voice.
Left. This is your left channel. Left.
And I've never done the color test. I don't know what that is.
I bet I can guess.
I have a general sense.
So it just looks like it displays various patterns. This is more for your TV.
This is just to like pad out the menu, maybe.
Yeah.
The poor kid, that's all they got for Christmas.
These cartridges were very expensive. They were like in the $300 range
Really?
originally.
For the privilege of testing a Super Nintendo.
We'll just plug in the last one just to see if there's any differences. And it is the same thing except that we have an accessories test, which is just those other two tests from the other cartridge in a different form. These are all kind of the same stuff, but they're all pretty different in their UI, which is kind of odd.
Imagine buying them all and being $900 deep into the whole thing. How much did you have to spend on all this?
They were pretty rare even then, and I think I paid in the $100 to $200 range per cartridge.
Wow, really? But what the heck is this?
This is a Super Nintendo that's just been bolted onto here, and it has a bunch of connections in the front. And you would take the video from the NES unit and actually run it into this, and then you could test the Super Nintendo or Nintendo. You test your controls, you could test your power adapter, you could test your RF switch and your multi-out connector. I don't think it's particularly useful, to be honest. At the time that I bought this, which is when I bought the rest of my collection, no one really had any idea that it's really just a Super Nintendo with a couple cables coming out the back. And a little tiny bit of electronics inside. I think I spent $200 on it.
Do you think that retro video game stores today, do you think they use the testers?
I doubt it. I highly doubt it.
People show up with broken Super Nintendos and they try to help them.
At this point, I think the number of problems in Super Nintendos are pretty known.
They just swap stuff.
Yeah, they just swap stuff. Or clean it. Nobody has the cleaning cartridges anymore. Now you can just take it somewhere, clean it, you pay them $10 and it's done. But a lot of the circuitry repair problems, nobody really is fixing those anymore, except now their Super Nintendos are starting to become a little more rare, so people are kind of interested in that stuff again. Which takes us to the third item. This manual is one of my most favorite pieces in my collection because it's got so much information on the Super Nintendo. Some people have made very good third-party schematics of the Super Nintendo, but I've never actually even seen the scans of these images from this manual online. So the way that these manuals worked is they were living documents. Nintendo would mail out to everybody who bought a set of these new updated information, and they would have this list of destroy pages and insert pages. So it would say, take out pages 738 through 740, throw them away, put in these new pages.
A Google Doc would really have been handy at that time.
Yes. Controller, Super Scope mouse, game packs, Super Game Boy, test fixtures, ICs, burn-in, and service bulletins, and then an appendix. This is the system overview. The kind of information that, certainly at this time, in 1992, when this manual first came out, you never would have gotten this information unless you were a developer or someone who was servicing it. Here, for example, is a block diagram of the system of the Super Nintendo, where the sound section is, the different controllers, and also a very nice parts diagram of the system, so that if you had a broken part, you could order the replacement part that you needed. And then these things, which are super cool, which are the schematics of the system. How to take it apart, very important information. There were two different types of security screws, one for the console itself and a different type of security screw on the cartridge front, so that people at home couldn't open up to service themselves. At the time, they were unique to Nintendo. So I paid about $300 for this. Right now on eBay, there's a set of all the books. There's 6 of them total, which includes the one for NES, the one for Game Boy, and that complete set, they're asking $7,000. But I think I could get $1,000 for this book. Some information on the Super Scope, how it works, a section on the Super Nintendo mouse. This is one of the most interesting sections, I think. This is about game packs. There's schematics for each of the different games. So here's, for example, is the schematic for Battle Clash. Here's the parts for F-Zero, Illusion of Gaia, and it just goes on and on. Here's the Mario paint. Just basically anything that you need to know in order to fix the physical hardware, the electronics of a system contained within this book. A whole chapter dedicated to the Super Game Boy. including its schematics and part list. Interesting thing about the Super Game Boy, it actually contains a complete Game Boy in it as well, just without the display, because the Super Nintendo was not powerful enough to emulate it. A section on how to do the burn-in test, including some of the stuff that we saw earlier about how it should look in color, no less. Actually, those are Doctor Service Marios. This lady that we didn't get to see any of because she wasn't even in our cartridge.
What the hell would she be doing in there?
Instead, they used the Mario 3 graphic, and apparently in later versions, they use this woman.
And she bounces around the screen.
I mean, we don't never hear about any big faults in the Super Nintendo, right? But there were actually a number of problems, and this little booklet of problems are all the warranty repair recalls that Nintendo had associated with their parts. A problem with the cable manufacturing that would make the strain relief break on the Super Nintendo controllers. A problem with NCAA basketball, which made it incompatible with some Super Nintendo consoles. A problem with the test cartridge itself that generated a failure that was not actually valid. So, just a ton of Super Nintendo information in there.
You know, it's for a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
So, what do we got coming up?
We're gonna take a look at some more rarities, some more unusual things that I have, including an SNES development unit, what they used to develop the games on. That'll be very interesting to see, I guarantee, next time on JuntSNES.
This is your right channel. Right. Left.